Thank you very much, Stephen Dominic. Good morning, everyone. Merry Christmas. Am I allowed to say that? Yeah, I can, can't I? 6 days to go. That's all right. Merry Christmas, everyone. Those of you that are in the room, I know we've got people watching online as well, so let me also extend a big welcome to you. Say Merry Christmas. So glad that you've joined us online for the carol service today. So great that you're here. I want to tell you about something that happened in 1994. It was January the 17th in Los Angeles in California. And a huge earthquake hit northern LA in California. 17th of January 1994, known as the North Ridge earthquake. And it was an incredibly powerful earthquake, hit 6.7 on the Richter scale. Apparently tremors could be felt over 200 miles away in Las Vegas. And it happened at 4:30 a.m. in the morning. And there was a huge kind of power outage, as you'd expect. All the power in that part of Los Angeles went out. And obviously, California has a history of earthquakes. There's been many over times. But there was something unusual that took place with this particular earthquake. As people emerged from their homes at 4:30 a.m. in the morning to this scene of darkness, I reckon there's about 2 million people that were impacted. They emerged from their homes to survey the damage that the earthquake had caused. But they began to notice something unusual, a phenomena, a strange thing in the sky that they hadn't seen before. And people started calling 911 and emergency call centres, not just to report the fact there'd been an earthquake and that their buildings had been damaged or whatever. They're reporting this strange phenomena that they saw in the sky. There was like this grey cloud above their heads. They couldn't make sense of it. Some people were even freaking out, thinking that during the earthquake it had caused some form of alien invasion that had taken place. And began calling up call centres to let them know. What people were in fact seeing above their heads at 4:30 a.m. that morning in LA was the stars. True story. It was the Milky Way. And they had never experienced or seen the stars so clearly because of the light pollution that LA lives under all the time. Now, LA is known as the City of Lights. There's a picture of it. And it never goes dark. And so it has so much light pollution in LA that you just don't see the canopy of stars. And as all the lights went out in LA and the people emerged from their houses, residents saw something they hadn't seen before. Stars clearly shining above their heads. They thought it was something strange that they were seeing. A whole light system had existed over their heads every single night, but they were not aware of its clarity and its brightness and its beauty. They suddenly saw this strange light over their heads, hovering above them in the sky. I sometimes wonder what the shepherds made of the strange light hovering over their heads that night in Bethlehem or outside Bethlehem as a host of angels appeared, singing and declaring to them. Earlier, Luke read to us that passage from Luke's Gospel that tells us about that evening as a host of angels declared peace to all and that a baby had been born. Strange lights filled the sky that night in Bethlehem. Clearly, the shepherds had never seen anything like this before. A host of angels bringing news of a baby born in Bethlehem. I mean, in and of itself, that's not big news, is it really? A baby born in Bethlehem? I imagine there were many babies born in the area that year. But there was something about this announcement, something about this child, this baby, that was different. Why did the arrival of this particular child cause a host of angels to come and light up the sky and appear to shepherds? Something clearly was very unique, something very different about this particular baby born in Bethlehem that night. Now, of course, we have the benefit of history. We can look back over 2,000 years of history and see that indeed this child, not just unique, his most significant person in human history. The shepherds at the time, it was right then, right now, right here. They were just seeing what they saw. They were just responding to what they heard. They didn't know what we know, that this baby, Jesus Christ, would go on to be easily the most influential person who has ever lived. I wonder what you make of Jesus. I wonder what you think of him, or who he was, or who he is. If we were chatting over a mince pie, if we could, this morning, and I asked you, who do you think Jesus is? I wonder what your honest response would be. Some research was done recently in the UK that indicates that 40% of adults in the UK, in our nation, aren't sure if Jesus was a real person or not. In fact, 22% of the country are certain that he wasn't, believing him to be a mythical or fictional character, even though there's overwhelming evidence in the contrary to that. Do I need to switch over microphones? No problem at all. 22% are certain that he was a fictional or mythical character. It's interesting. Who is this child, Jesus? I think it's one of the huge opportunities actually we have as a church is to tell people about the real Jesus, to encourage people to consider him. Now, in the Bible, Jesus describes himself in lots of different ways, uses different pictures and metaphors to help us know something of who he is. He talks about being the truth and the gate and the way. But he also once described himself like this. In John 8, verse 12, he says this: I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Whoever follows me, Jesus says, will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I don't know if any of you have ever gone for a walk in complete darkness. Anyone remember a time going for a walk? Show me a hand if you can remember being in utter, complete darkness going for a walk. Last Christmas, obviously, was a very different experience for all of us. We were under much stricter lockdown restrictions then. I guess a year ago, we'd never imagined that we'd still be living under the impact of the pandemic. But we weren't able to do many of the things that we normally do at Christmas last year. Everything was locked down and restricted. So as a family, we were looking for good things that we could do. And our friends Nigel and Sarah, they recommended an idea for something. They said that the Bluebell Railway at Christmas has these incredible lights. They light up the steam engines. Has anyone seen this at Bluebell Railway? There's just a couple here. And Nigel and Sarah said there's this place that you can go. It's near Horsted Canes, where if you drive down this lane, you can park and you can find this footpath, and it takes you along to a little footbridge over the Bluebell Railway, and you can see the train coming in the distance. And they said it's a brilliant thing to do. And also they said it was free, and I'm always up for a free night, so I'm thinking brilliant. They sent us a Google map of where it was. So as a family, we have 4 children. We packed up the car. We packed up a flask of hot chocolate. We found this place on Google Maps. We said, right, we'll go and see the train. So we parked on this little lane outside Horsted Canes, and we were walking down the road in the dark. Quite a lot of cars coming towards us, no footpath. It was all part of the fun of the evening. And we found the footpath on the map. The problem was it really was very, very dark evening. And the footpath took us over this field, and so we kind of tried to navigate our way over the fields. We realized that right early at the start of the journey, the footpath kind of took us over where the cows that day had been drinking at their trough. It was very dark. We were aware of it by its smell and its texture, and that's all I need to say. We started walking over this field. I don't know if you remember last winter, it was a particularly wet winter. Now, I'm a country boy. I grew up in the country. I grew up in a little place called Fletching. I don't know if anyone's been there or heard of Fletching. Never have I ever walked across a more flooded or waterlogged field than we walked over that night. The combination of darkness, cold, kind of being lost, and mud and other things made this evening quite something to remember. On at least one occasion, one of my children got their Wellington boots stuck so deeply in the mud that they went to take the next step and the boots remained where it was, though the foot continued. We were walking over this field, and it was very dark. It was very wet. We weren't sure where we were. Weren't really sure where we were going. Now I have 4 children. I don't know if any parents can relate to an experience like this, where me and Dominique were keeping positive, said, "Hey kids, isn't this fun?" And our 4 kids kind of stared back at us and said, "Dad, you might think it's fun, but it's dark. It's It's really wet. It's cold. We're in the middle of a muddy field. We don't know where we are. We don't know where we're going. We don't even know if we're going to see a train at the end of it. In fact, Ruby, who's our 17-year-old, she actually began crying in the middle of the field, which obviously you're like, yay, parented win, success moment. This is a fun Christmas family adventure together. It's almost as if our kids were questioning whether this was the best thing we've ever done at Christmas. Eventually, we got to the top of the field, found the footbridge where we waited in the dark for quite some time. And then we saw a light. Was it a train? No. It was a farmer on the quad bike coming quite fast towards us. And my kids are like, that's brilliant. Dark, cold, wet, and now we're going to get done for trespassing. This is absolutely brilliant. In fact, he wasn't that interested in us, which is quite a relief. So we waited in the dark a little bit longer, but then in the distance we saw this. Isn't that a beautiful thing? 2 hours of fun exploration for 45 seconds of joy. I thought that was a worthwhile walk. Not sure all my family thought it was a worthwhile walk, but I certainly thought it was a worthwhile walk. Out of the darkness emerged this glorious, fun, beautiful light. All the readings that you've heard today reference light in them. So if you notice that, Dominique read from Isaiah. Isaiah was a guy who lived about 700 years before Jesus. He says the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. What's this great light? Unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. He'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. It's the most extraordinary thing that 700 years before Jesus was born, someone called Isaiah was saying, this is what's going to happen. Light is going to come into darkness, and this baby born will be Prince of Peace. Everlasting Father. Amazing, amazing words. We've already spoken about the lights that filled the skies above the shepherds as they watched sheep outside Bethlehem. Caroline read to us from John chapter 1, incredible words about Jesus' birth, about when Jesus came and put on flesh and blood, made his dwelling amongst us. It says the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. Jesus was this true light. In him, the verse says, was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. When you think about the Christmas story, you think about light, whether it's angels appearing to shepherds, whether it's a star that wise men followed, whether it's John's description of Jesus coming as light, whether it's Isaiah reading, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. This image of light is so significant. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. It wasn't just a throwaway comment. Jesus was saying something profoundly important for every single one of us. He said it in Jerusalem. He said it when there was a festival going on in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem would have been absolutely heaving with people. And he would have been in one of the busiest areas of the temple courts. It was a festival called the Feast of Tabernacles. And during this festival, the Feast of Tabernacles, they had something called the illumination of the temple, where 4 huge torches were set up in the temple courts. It said that the torches were as tall as the temple walls itself. On top of each of these torches was a bowl that contained 65 litres of oil, and that was lit as the flaming torch. And it said that the whole of the temple was lit up by these torches, and it actually lit up all of the city of Jerusalem could see this light. Why did they do that? Well, they did it to remember. The Jewish people were remembering something in their history, something that we read about in the Old Testament when they were in the wilderness for 40 years, and God led them through the wilderness by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire at night. Literally, as they walked through the darkness of a wilderness desert experience, the Israelite nation were led by a pillar of fire. As they followed the fire, they weren't living in darkness. And it's in this context that they're remembering that and celebrating that Jesus then declares, I am the light of the world. He is the light that would be able to lead and guide and protect people through the darkness of life. Whoever follows me, he says, will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Whoever follows Jesus will not walk in darkness. I don't know about you, but I found the last couple of years pretty challenging for lots of reasons. Found it quite confusing at times as you try and comprehend what's happening. It's felt dark. There's been moments it's felt pretty dark, if not dark, certainly pretty foggy, like you're trying to see a way through something. I think we all maybe feel a little bit of a weariness about the news that we hear. I don't know about you, do I feel like, oh, wow, just a little bit weary with the news. And not just about the pandemic. Now, when I look at BBC News website and I hear about child poverty in the UK, I'm like, oh, wow. Or when I hear about another family who have lost their life because they're in desperate need and they're trying to get across the channel to our nation, you're like, oh. When you hear about the mental health crisis that's escalated in our nation, you're like, oh my goodness, it feels pretty dark sometimes, doesn't it? It feels pretty challenging, the world in which we live. And I know those people here, you'll be going through real trial or have gone through real loss in the last 2 years, or you'll know someone who has, going through real difficulty at the moment. We know darkness is real. We all feel it sometimes. What's interesting is the Bible never pretends anything else, actually. The Bible says, yeah, that is actually the reality. Life is tough. There are some people, I think, who assume that those with faith, those who have a faith, who follow religion, they only do it because they need some form of escapism from everyday life. So some would say that you follow Jesus, you're a Christian because you need some kind of escape from reality. You need kind of another fantasy world to believe in because that only helps you make sense of the world in which you're in. Kind of like faith in God is like a leap into the unknown, an embracing of unreality, like a form of escapism, because if I can think about that, it will stop me having to think about this. But that isn't what the Bible says. It can be further from the truth, actually, what the Bible says. The Bible's very honest, actually. The Bible doesn't lead us to escapism. It leads us to reality. It says, yeah, there's darkness in our world. And at some point, we may all face seasons in our lives where we feel that acutely. The Bible doesn't lead us to escapism. It leads us to reality. But into that reality is loud and clear the voice of Jesus saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will know the light of life. It's not trying to pretend darkness isn't real, but it is saying, but God has come into the middle of darkness. That's what we've been singing about, what we've been celebrating today through the carols. Jesus comes into that reality and says, I am the light of the world. He actually invites us not to escape reality, but to partner with him in bringing his light to this world. The darkness is real, but the good news of the Christian faith, the good news of Christmas, is that light has come into the darkness. You see, light extinguishes darkness. Light opens our eyes. Light helps us to see things more clearly. Light helps us to see the way. Light overcomes fear. It's why people put security lights on their houses and buildings. It's why we have headlights on our cars. It's why children love to have a glow light in the corner of their room, because actually we all need light. And Jesus' astonishing claim is this, that he is the light that we need. He is the only one who can really kind of deal with the darkness in our world, which he did on a cross when he died and rose again, what we celebrate at Easter. So Christianity doesn't call us to live in escapism, doesn't call us to live in a fantasy world, an unreality, but instead it calls us to know that in the darkness, light has come. His name is Jesus. He can be known, he can be trusted, and that light is good news for everyone, and that light can change everything, and that those who follow him can live knowing that they have the light of life in them. That's what Jesus promises us in John chapter 8. Now, to illustrate what I'm trying to say, I want you just to hear a story of a lady in our church. Her name is Catherine, so have a look at the screen.
I didn't grow up knowing who Jesus was. I went to church at Christmas and Easter, as everyone does, and so I probably thought I was a Christian, but really didn't have any idea of who Jesus was. I had two parents who loved me, but unfortunately as a child I suffered abuse at the hands of people who I should have been able to trust. At the age of 11, I was so unhappy that I started self-harming. I had very low self-esteem. I didn't love myself at all. I was struggling with depression at that age, and as I got older that didn't get any better, and I looked to get my self-worth from other people. I got into quite an abusive relationship when I was 16. When I came out of that relationship, not long after that, my brother encouraged me to go to church. And the only real reason I went along is I thought it might be a great opportunity to meet another man. But actually, I ended up meeting Jesus there, which turned out to be much more exciting. Although I was going to church and knew who Jesus was, it didn't suddenly mean life wasn't difficult. Not long after, my mum was diagnosed with cancer, and I felt like maybe God was punishing me for things I'd done earlier in my life. I was diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder, as well as depression and anxiety. And I turned to alcohol, really, and self-harm they were my coping mechanisms. It got to the point where I just had such low self-worth, and I just hated who I was so much that I tried to end my own life on several occasions. Every time I did it, God's handprints are all over it, where he stopped me and he pulled me back and he showed me that life was still worth living. But I was not in a good place mentally at all. Someone at the church I was attending at the time heard of a charity called Mercy UK, which is a residential home in Yorkshire for women with life-controlling issues. And I spent 6 months there just focusing on me and my relationship with Jesus. While you're there, there's no TV, no internet. And I had just started dating a guy at the time who's now my husband, but we spent 6 months writing to each other. We wrote to each other several times a week. We were playing battleships via post, which backwards and forwards took about 6 months to play a game. I did win the game, very proud of myself for that. While I was at Mercy, that was where I really got to know who Jesus was. I got to know him, got to know who I am because of who he made me to be. And that was where I really fell in love with Jesus and started to let him transform my life and turn me into the person that he had created me to be. Now, I'm not saying that from then on life was easy. There have still been some really tough times. Not long after coming home from Mercy, my mum died. And what could have been one of the darkest situations and darkest times of my life, Jesus just shone his light into that. God took a situation which could have been completely hopeless, and he filled it with hope because of Jesus. Hope that I will see my mum again one day. Hope that God has a plan and a future for me. And I guess my testimony is just that God has taken a life that was so full of darkness, and he has brought light. He has taken a life that had no joy, and he's given me joy. He has taken what seemed hopeless, and he has spoken life and light into it. He has given me a hope which anchors my soul, and I am so grateful to God every single day. Since I got to know Jesus, and since I fell in love with him, and since I let him into my life, it has been full of light, it has been full of hope.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much. He has taken a life that was so full of darkness, and he's brought light. He's taken a life that had no joy, and he's given me joy. He's taken what seemed hopeless and has spoken life and light into it. And I'm so grateful to God every single day. Guys, God does not invite us to escape reality, nor does he abandon us to face it alone. Instead, he has come amongst us. Emmanuel means God with us. God came, unto us a child is born, a son is given. He entered in as a light into the darkness. He is the light of the world, Jesus. He's the answer. Some of us feel like We might be stumbling around a little bit in life, wondering what it's all about, feel like we're living in a fog. Christ says to us, I am the light of life. Follow him, you will have the light of life, is the promise. The author C.S. Lewis, I love, read over the last year or so, the Chronicles of Narnia to my lads. C.S. Lewis, he once said this, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen. Not only because I see it, but because by it, I see everything else. It's as we know Jesus that we can make sense of everything else that happens around us. It's interesting, going back to the story at the beginning of those guys in LA who came out of their houses at 4:30 in the morning to be amazed by this strange phenomena that was above their heads, the stars, the Milky Way, seeing them for the first time when the lights went out. You know, the thing that was keeping those people in LA from seeing the lights was artificial lights. Stars are always there, but they just hadn't noticed them because their life was so filled with other artificial lights that they couldn't see the light of the stars in clarity and in perspective. They were always there, of course. The stars were shining all the time, but people didn't see them because of the artificial light around them. And the same can be true of Jesus. This promise has stood for 2,000 years. He is there. He always has been there. As sure as the stars are in the sky, Jesus is there. But what happens is we can just fill our lives with artificial light that kind of blind us from the one true light. Sometimes we need some of those other things to be turned off in order for us to be able to see Jesus and his glorious declaration that he is the light of the world. We can be blinded by artificial light sometimes. Things in our life that we fill our lives with, clambering for attention, but there's only one light of the world. His name's Jesus, and you can know him, and he made a promise 2,000 years ago, and the promise stands today that all who follow him won't walk in darkness, but will know light of life. And in a few minutes, I'm going to pray, and it may be that you want to pray with me when I pray, that we may know his light this Christmas. But before that happens, the team here are just going to perform a song for us. So I'd ask you just to remain seated, listen to these words, and in a moment we'll pray together.